So we are reading by Voltaire, Candide or Optimism. Sometimes it's translated as Candide or The Optimist. And Walter, do you want to go to talk about the beginning of this story? I mean, the beginning is really the setup is a good portion of the whole story, frankly. Just by talking about the theology that it's going to examine.
So first of all, the form of Candide is short chapters, many of them, many incidents. Whole earthquakes that wipe out cities happen in a chapter. Whole wars happen within a short chapter. It is the comedy of aggregation, of relentless aggregation of disaster. Okay. In some ways, it's a little like the Abbott and Costello Who's on First routine, in that it, or there's a hole in the bottom of the sea or something. It just keeps adding disasters and disasters. And then it will also sometimes list all of them that have happened so far. And the list just grows longer and longer and longer. And the joke is, as is explained in the beginning, that Candide, the young, open-hearted, open-minded, and good-looking, student of this tutor named Dr. Pangloss, has been shown, let's say, not just taught, but shown by Dr. Pangloss that we live in the best of all possible worlds, and that even when things look dark, it's because we haven't seen the way that they add up to a wonderful ending. At one point, Pangloss even espouses a formula. The more private suffering there is in the world, the more public good there is. So in other words, when you're walking down the street and a dog bites you on the leg, and gives you rabies, you have no idea how that is supporting a hospital, which supports a wonderful health system, which is the best of all health systems. And if people weren't bit by dogs on the leg, how would it get income to cure the big things? So in other words, Candide is drilled early on. He's a child in a baron's castle. And really, the only characters you need to know are him, his tutor, Dr. Pangloss, who's based on a philosopher, a real life philosopher named Leibniz, I believe, and who, and then this beautiful girl who Cunegond. I don't know why, but there's something dirty about her name, and I can't put my finger on it. It just has letters and sounds and some look that is just, I see Sydney Sweeney now. They've shoved Sydney Sweeney into our brain now in the last few days using modern persuasion techniques. So as I read Cunegond, I start seeing her. She's a woman who basically everyone who sees her wants to be with.
Yes.
And her, and so these three main characters go forth into the world, and it is a steady march through horrors, the horrors of syphilis that afflict Dr. Pangloss,
And pieces of his face are falling off and everything.
Yeah. And it's all about the ability to maintain philosophical composure in the face of a world that looks a lot like battle bots with human flesh.
Right. So the basic theory is because things suck, they are good, right? And or
that all things that suck work for good, and therefore they don't really suck, because without them you could not have the perfection. Early on, a couple of examples are given. Why do humans have noses? To support glasses.
Well, I was going to read the run up to that because it describes the whole cosmology here. Pangloss was professor of metaphysico-theologico cosmolo-negology. He proved admirably that there is no effect without a cause, and that in this best of all possible worlds, the Baron's castle was the most magnificent of castles, and his lady the best of all possible baronesses. It is demonstrable, said he, that things cannot be otherwise than as they are, for all being created for an end, all is necessarily for the best end. Observe that the nose has been formed to bear spectacles. Thus, we have spectacles. Legs are visibly designed for stockings, and we have stockings, and so on. And he goes on and on like that.
Yeah,
so
the reason
yeah.
the reason we have stones is to build that castle. You know?
Right. Right. And there's a little bit of a joke on who pays for philosophy. Like, that's how you get these ideas.
What's amazing is that Voltaire in 1749 or 50 is satirizing people who we at a later date are to believe are gods of philosophy. You know what I mean? In other words, it's interesting to see what the contemporaries thought of each other in an age which we're led to believe was one of giants and of incredible, Leibniz, didn't he invent calculus or something?
Something like that. Yes.
Yeah. The calculus, the calculus. And so essentially what Voltaire is saying is that this philosophy that everything is determined in a way, it's not just the best of all possible worlds because it's wonderful, but because it couldn't be otherwise. In other words, though they never say this, we may as well believe it's good because it can't be any different.
Right.
And what you're starting to see as the evidence piles up of the Lisbon earthquake, thousands dying. And then, how does the Catholic Church respond to the Lisbon earthquake? By rounding up heretics and torturing them as though their sin was responsible. In other words, most of the population dies in an earthquake, and I believe this was based on a historical event. And
there was a real earthquake at the time.
Yeah. And then the church responds by seeking out the sinners who were responsible for it, who managed to survive, and then torturing the survivors, and yet they maintain their equanimity. In fact, what this really is a story about what we call denial, the psychological process called denial or cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is a theory that as you start to see contrary evidence to ideas that you're invested in, you will invest further in them.
Right.
Because you cannot bear the notion that at both the ego level and the intellectual level, you're wrong about everything. Yeah. So the more proof you get you're wrong, and we've seen this in Russiagate, dude, the more proof we get that this was all bullshit, the more the New York Times seems to run editorials from Brennan and Clapper saying it's all innocent. I mean, the doubling down process is a lot like what Candide is taught from Pangloss, which is that look at every disaster, no matter how much worse it is than the previous one, as a wonderful proof, almost mathematical, that everything works out for the best.
I mean, already within the first 4 or 5 chapters, Candide has been he's already had a sword plunged into him. He's been whipped in an auto-da-fe, which is one of my favorite words of all time. It's like a public torture spectacle in Lisbon. There's an earthquake that kills scores of people. Cunegonde is no longer a beautiful young maiden very quickly in this book.
She's already been the slave of a couple of people. She's been raped
To the very limit of human endurance.
To the very
right?
limit of human endurance. Candide himself has been flogged such that all of his organs from his neck down have been laid bare to the elements. And yet they troop on with the sunshine in their face, with hope in their hearts that it can't get worse, but it does. And each time it does, they reconvene to figure out in what way this proves that all is for the best.
Yeah, and occasionally he has moments of candor, like Candide. Candide, terrified, amazed, desperate, all bloody, all palpitating, said to himself, and this is after he's been whipped and flogged. And if this is the best of all possible worlds, what then are the others? Well, if I had been only whipped, I could put up with it. For I experienced that among the Bulgarians. But, oh, my dear Pangloss, thou greatest of philosophers, that I should have seen you hang. Pangloss gets hanged and survives. Oh, Miss Cunegonde, thou pearl of girls, that thou shouldst have had thy belly ripped open. But they go on and on to still talking about this being the best of all possible worlds, and it could not be otherwise. And they keep doubling down. And you're right, not just in Russiagate, but also like this is what con artists rely on when yes. A victim does not like to believe that they've been conned. So you can con them again, always, right? Like
right.
They will cling to the tiniest sliver of hope that all of this was Jake, right? And you can get them in that place.
So to compare this to sort of secular experiences, this, comic book level story with these giant disasters. I once was given a stock in a company that I knew a little bit about, but not much. But I was given it as a gift. Okay. Mm-hmm. And let's say I was given the stock at $20 a share. I think it was that. Well, shortly after I was given the stock, it went to $15 a share. And the person who gave it to me said, "Don't sell. Don't sell. This is, it had gone up a lot. This is just a little retrenchment. This is actually the basis for a further, leap. They'll often tell you with stocks that when it falls back, it's finding a floor so that it can get the leverage to go even further forward." So I didn't sell at 15. 10, I didn't sell because this is so ridiculous that this $20 stock could go to $10, that it means something weird is happening and there will be an opposite reaction that will be just as, this is irrational. There'll be an opposite reaction that sends it higher. That kind of reasoning went on to zero.
Well, I mean, look, it's a perfect metaphor. I mean, what they end up suffering in this book, those three characters, and there are a few other characters who hang along for a little while, yeah. And you get to know them. But essentially, it's like an odyssey where they're clinging to this belief system as they suffer every horrible thing that can possibly happen to human beings. And Voltaire, it takes a lot of care to think up the worst possible situations. Like he really expends a lot of his inventive power on things like, Cunegonde essentially being enslaved and trafficked on a timeshare system
by timeshare in which she two people own her for different parts of the week. But there's controversy over who owns her on Sunday when the timeshare turns over. And both parties assert their rights to her on Sundays. No, it is devilish by Voltaire because he once he's got you in this morbid, devilish black humor frame of mind, he uses his incredible logical gifts to come up with even more infernal and absolutely incontrovertibly nightmarish scenarios.
Right. Yeah, he's one of those writers who it feels a little bit like a blade going through something when he writes, and a lot of the humor in these chapters is, there's as you say, it travels with tremendous speed, like earthquakes happen in single sentences. But when he gets to a particularly horrible concept, he pauses and stops and invites the tour group to take a really good look around at exactly how awful people can be to each other. And that's funny because you're imagining the frame of mind of the fiendish author who is delighting in all this.
Yes, and to set us up for the next discussion, I think I'm about a third of the way through. I promised you that I would, give a clear and honest narrative of my progress through the book because I've never read it before. And at this point, I'm asking the question: why should I go further if all I'm going to get is infinite compounding of this joke, of this essential joke? Things are going to get worse and worse and worse. Voltaire is going to delight in making them worse. Pangloss is going to become more and more creative and desperate, but also confident in his interpretations of things. And Candide, the witness, who's basically our surrogate, right, is going to maybe increasingly challenge him or feel a little shaken in this.
Exactly.
But I'm asking the question, is this going to just be a parabolic ascent, or are there going to be turns? And as I say, I don't know the answer to that yet.
Yeah, I mean, well, we'll get to it, right? I think that is the dramatic problem of this book, is that he doesn't give you a whole lot of reason to be invested in the future early, and it's not the ending is not going to be some situation where the person finds God or it's John Lennon's "All You Need Is Love." It's not going to be something like that.
But it's very similar to that supposedly classic joke among comedians, the aristocrats.
Right, the aristocrats, exactly. Yes.
Where the aristocrat, the joke is just to make dirtier and more perverse and more horrible variations on what this group of actors does on stage, and is it going to be like that? Or is there going to be some opening out into further wisdom, a transcendence of the original premise? Or is it really just a potato chip book? More, where you get addicted to Voltaire's ability to invent, come up with these things, and reiterate the premise.
Yes, and I think we can even have an argument about this, because my take on this book is that Voltaire was in a race, that he was trying to have the power of his invention and his dazzling prose outpace the dramatic limitations of the story and carry you all the way to the ending. I think he succeeds because I enjoyed it all the way through. Like, I laughed all the way through. Right. So to me, that's proof that it worked. But it's something we can definitely debate. And how does somebody that this bright and this cutting but also this pessimistic, how do they, what reason does he find to keep going on, right? In the middle of the book, it's very interesting. So we're going to get to that next time. Right. But frankly, the aristocrats thing is a good ending for Russiagate too, right? Like, that's going to be the ending of this whole thing. Like, and what's underneath it all? The aristocrats, right?
And what did they call it? Russiagate.
Right, exactly. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. And Walter, thank you for hanging in at this special time. And we'll see you all next week.